Greetings, everyone. Today I want to share with you an idea that I first heard in a shiur by Rabbi David Finkelstein, who in turn got it from his teacher, Rabbi Arthur Green, who in turn based it on a section of the Talmud, which says that in the time when the temple stood, at the hour when the sacrifices were being offered, the people in the villages would read the section of Genesis 1 that corresponded to the day of the week. And Rabbi Green has suggested that we start doing this again in order to get more in touch with the environment. Now, I heard this and I thought this is perfect. I mean, one of the reasons that I film these videos out in the woods rather than in front of a bookcase like many rabbis do is because I too am trying to get people to be more in touch with God's creation. Now, before I get into this, how I did it, how it works for me, I want to deal with the question of how literally we have to take this story, because already I can hear the atheists on one side saying it's a fairy tale, and on the other side I can hear the fundamentalists telling me it was literally 24-hour days and everything in between, and I want to say, stop. That's not where I'm going with this. For the sake of this exercise, it doesn't really matter how you read the story. A person can read a story in many different ways, and I'll get into some of those in a minute. One of my teachers, Rabbi Moshe Adler, back when he was the Hillel rabbi at the University of Minnesota in the late 1970s, said this. He said, God could have sent Carl Sagan down to tell our ancestors how the universe was made, but they would not have understood him. And so he gave them a story with the outline of what happened, that they could understand at that time, and that also would be a universal story that would have meaning for all time. Now, this resonated with me. I mean, in 3500 B.C.E., they didn't know quantum physics. They didn't know Big Bang. They didn't have any telescopes. They didn't have basic mathematics. So to even understand if something could have been 13 billion years, how would you understand that? I can't even visualize 13 billion years, but everybody knows what a day is. And so to say there was evening, there was morning, the first day. So you want to take it literally as 24-hour days, fine. You want to take it as a parable, fine. I believe it's many different things. And from there, I'm going to go into some ways we can look at this story. One way of looking at the story is the classical way, the consecutive linear time mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The events happen in that order, and then on the seventh day, God rests in its Shabbat, the Sabbath. This follows evolution rather closely, except for one little problem, and that is the sun is in the middle of the week. And the skeptics will say, aha, how could this be true? You have plants before you have the sun. This is impossible. There's light before you have the sun. Well, the rabbis of the Talmud were ahead of you. Some of them felt that everything was actually created in the mind of God on the first day. The sun already existed. But then the story is told in a certain order. That's one way to look at it. Rabbi Nathan Slifkin, in his book, The Challenge of Creation, points out that the ancient peoples of the time, they all worshiped the sun. And so if the sun had come in the beginning of the week, people would have said, aha, the sun is the great God that made everything. If the sun had come at the end of the week, they would have said, the sun is the greatest of all. Putting the sun in the middle of the week, between the plants and the sea creatures, basically made it one more thing that was created. The sun was not a god. So these are some of the things you might explore as you are looking at this in the linear time mode, if that's the way you want to approach it. A second way of viewing this story is to think of it as God first creates 3 kingdoms and then fills them with creatures. So with this model, day 1, God creates space. Jewish mysticism speaks of Tzimtzum, contraction. That in the beginning, before everything, before Bereshit, in the beginning, everything was just all God. And God contracts him or herself to make a space in which to create the universe. And then a little beam of light comes in, according to the Zohar, and expands, and that's the Big Bang. So the first day, God creates the universe. The second day, God creates the oceans and the atmosphere, the waters above and the waters below. As it says in the Torah, God separates them so that you have liquid water below and you have evaporated water in the clouds. You have the rain cycle. And it's pretty much agreed that you need a water planet in order to have life. That dry planets like Mars may have had life at one time, but you can't really have life on a desert planet. So now we have the possibility of life. Then God creates dry land. And so you have 3 areas, 3 kingdoms. You have space, you have the water cycle, and you have dry land. Then God fills these kingdoms with various things. So the sun, moon, and stars on day 4 is what he uses to fill space. And the sea creatures on day 5 is what he uses to fill the waters. And mammals and humans and other land animals he uses to fill the land. So that's another way to look at it. You're not necessarily seeing each of it as consecutive linear days, but rather as a process that first you have 3 things created, and then you have 3 more things that fill the 3 things in the beginning. So that's the second way that you might possibly understand this story. A third way to approach the story in Genesis 1 is to see it as an outline of categories, not necessarily happening in a linear way. They could all be happening simultaneously. For example, I'm sitting here making a video. At the same time I'm doing that, a lot of other things are happening here in the forest. There's trees growing, there's birds chirping, there's snakes crawling through the grass, all kinds of things. Then you go into town and all the people are buying and selling, and in the background I can hear the freeway 2 miles away, whatever. All these things are happening simultaneously, but I need to focus somewhere, and so I'm focused on doing my video. So at the same time, perhaps each of the days of creation helps us to focus on a specific aspect of that process. Maybe all these things are happening simultaneously, but maybe we have to focus in on an outline to understand them. So day 1 in this model, I focused on outer space, on astrophysics, on space exploration, on astronomy, on all kinds of things that go with that. Day 2, I focused on ocean currents and storm currents, the atmosphere and the oceans, and learned a lot about those things and saw how, for example, the jet stream, which used to stay where it belongs up there around the Arctic Circle, now because of global warming dips all the way down to Texas, which is one of the reasons we have such strange weather and such severe storms lately. So I began focusing a little on climate change and how that was affecting our atmosphere and our oceans. On day 3, I focused on plants and ecosystems, on rainforests and deserts and temperate forests like the one I'm sitting in today, and how these ecosystems work together. Day 4, when you get the sun, moon, and stars, which I'd already looked at a bit on day 1 with astronomy, but now they mark the seasons, the days and the months and the weeks. So I began thinking about time management. You know, one of the things Rabbi Zalman Schachter said one time, the reason we have inflation is because the world has lost its sense of Shabbat, its sense of a Sabbath. He wasn't saying the whole world would observe the Jewish Sabbath. What he was saying is this: we had no sense of saying enough, dayenu. I stopped, I made enough, whatever. People used to, they'd work for 6 days and then they would stop, close their shops or whatever. People had a sense of stopping to celebrate. But then we got into, and he said it was World War II that did this, 7 days a week, 24 hours around the clock with the Industrial Revolution. Everything's, go, 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 go. And we have no sense of slowing down. And when you have no sense of slowing down, you have no sense of saying enough of something. And so time management became something I focused on day 4. Day 5, I looked at sea creatures and birds. By the way, the common denominator of these creatures is they all lay eggs, and so I looked at these creatures and realized a lot of things about the ocean and about the migration of birds, migration of butterflies, the monarch butterflies that used to come here to my place by the hundreds. We have lots of milkweed here, but lately very few monarch butterflies arrive. So the creatures of the air and the creatures of the sea. And on day 6, we focus on the mammals and the other creatures that live on the earth and the human beings. And so I began to see that these are categories. And each week, as I did this reading the days of creation, I would find something to read or a video to watch or something that would focus on that particular category. And I found that in doing this, it brought me much closer to understanding God's creation, however you want to interpret that. I will end this video with a story that I was told many years ago. I don't know if it's literally true or if it's a parable. As Rabbi Nachman of Breslov once said, when asked if all of his stories were true, he said, not all stories are literally true, but when the people tell them, they are holy. And in that spirit, I share this with you. Many years ago, a missionary came to the Lakota people out in South Dakota and gave a Bible to one of the elders. And the native elder accepted it graciously, and the missionary went his way. A couple of weeks later, the missionary comes back and says, have you had a chance to read that Bible? And the elder says, yes, wonderful book. I'm on page 1. Ah, says the missionary, he's at least reading it. And he goes away and comes back again a couple of weeks. And again, this elder is on page 1. And this went on for like a couple of months. And finally, the missionary said to him, how are you reading this book? And the native elder said, well, in the beginning it said that God created light. So I spent a whole day out in the woods looking at light. And I watched light reflect off of the water. I watched sunlight. I watched the sunrise, the sunset, and all the different ways that light manifests itself in the world. And then it said, in the second day, it said God made the clouds and the water. And so I watched the clouds, how every day, every moment, the clouds were different. And he went on, and it turned out that each day he was taking one sentence of Genesis and making that his meditation for the day. And so this is the way I wish that we Jews could read our texts. All too often we just on through. But if we could have that same consciousness to take each sentence and take it into our hearts and go out into the real natural world and see how it applies in the world that we live in, I believe that too would raise our consciousness and our awareness of the creation and the environment.